Hello there, you're watching Al24 News channel live from Algiers, and welcome to our special continuous live coverage regarding the latest Russian and Ukrainian, which is turning into worldly crisis right after this quick break. And we start with a summary of the whole situation so far. Russian forces declare a ceasefire to allow humanitarian corridors out of the Ukrainian cities of Mariupol and Volnovachka. President Zelensky accuses NATO for weakness after it rejected the idea of no-flying zone over Ukraine. Multiple news outlets say they will pause their work inside Russia, citing a new law that could mean jail for those found to be intentionally spreading fake news. And Russia says it is blocking Facebook and restricting access to Twitter, citing restrictions on Russian media. And finally, more than 1.2 million people have fled Ukraine to neighboring countries, according to UN. And to discuss this thorny file, I welcome our panel of guests, Julia Roknifad, Assistant Professor in the School of Politics, History and International Relations, University of Nottingham from Malaysia, in addition to Don McLean, Jill, a geopolitical analyst, Indo-Pacific geopolitics author from Philippines, and later on in studio, Hussam Berkan, PhD candidate of International Political Affairs. Welcome all. Well, I start with you, Julia. According to media sources, Russian troops are ready to shell Ukrainian cities, so the capital Kiev falls. Is it a media game, propaganda, or is it a reality that we are likely to see coming true anytime soon?
Well, Nadia, I think that would be a disaster both in terms of PR for Russian government and in terms of decision-making process for Russia to decide directly to shell Ukrainian cities. That wasn't the strategy since the very beginning, and even after the Russian military command realized that they need to change a strategy because it's not going so smoothly as it was expected. I don't think there is a resolve to shell Ukrainian cities, so it might be a part of the propaganda because, as we know, it would be against the Geneva Conventions, in particular using some certain types of weapons which would incur multiple civilian casualties. So to me, the way it seems that the Russian army still tries to move forward with the least civilian casualties as possible.
Okay, so don't you think here, Julia, that according to what's happening on the ground, that the Ukrainian capital Kiev is to fall soon? Julia?
Oh, that's a question to me.
Sorry?
Yeah, that's a question to me. If the Ukrainian capital of Kiev is to fall soon. Well, that I'm not a military strategist, so I don't think I can suggest an informed opinion on that. And for that, I guess we need to be on the ground.
Now, let's have a closer look to this map where Russia is bombarding major cities in Ukraine more than a week into a war where Moscow has faced setbacks on the battlefield. Russia's push to seize key Ukrainian cities accelerated, with the Russian military claiming that its forces were fully in control of Kherson, a port near the Black Sea. Welcome, Don, to our show. Can you tell us a little bit about the thousands of mercenaries USA is sending to Ukraine, their background, for instance?
Yes, thank you for having me. And I agree with Professor Julia, of course, in terms of the dangers of spreading narratives and propaganda, especially since the situation is absolutely tense. Now, in terms of mercenaries, you know, there are accusations from both sides of the camp. The Russian Defense Ministry report said that the West has been sending mercenaries to Ukraine to support the Ukrainian armed forces. And the report also says from the ministry that there are several individuals attacking Russian military convoy using Western weapons. So you're talking about US weapons, UK anti-tank missiles, etc. Now, Russia has also called to the attention the Croatian government because the report also highlighted at least 200 individuals from Croatia via Poland. And in fact, there may be further escalation of the scope towards the Middle East and Africa.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yes, please go ahead. Go ahead, Don. Yes.
Okay, yeah. Yes. So on top of that, from the other side, of course, U.S. intelligence has also emphasized that Russia is poised to send at least 1,000 more mercenaries to Ukraine in the coming days. Now, this is very problematic if we talk about the legal implications based on the Geneva Convention. Let's say these mercenaries are detained. Would it be an issue in terms of the prisoners of war and how they are treated? Or how would they be persecuted in terms of their criminal liabilities? So this further complicates the situation and brings into light several instances of international law.
Mm-hmm. We will talk about this point later on, Don, regarding the mercenaries themselves and their background further in our show. And now Russia's defense ministry blamed the incident at the site of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine on Ukrainian saboteurs, calling it a monstrous provocation, while Ukraine has said Russian forces attacked the plant in the early hours of Friday, an incident that provoked international condemnation of Moscow. Well, back to you, Julia. Russia has finally rejected the Ukrainian story and has accused saboteurs groups who might do this and just blow the whole area to an inhabitant one who might benefit from such a potentially nuclear war.
I don't think that Russia is a party incredibly conscious in the framework of the whole non-proliferation regime would be interested in provoking nuclear pollution in Ukraine or elsewhere. So we need to follow the real story of what happened there. Mm-hmm. And in the course
what
of
is the real story here, according to you, Julia? What is the real story?
I wish we knew. I don't think we should resort to the real story, according to Julia. I wish we had an access to the real story according to the objective reality of what happened on the ground. As you know, according to Russia and information from the ground, there was no danger, and the fire that was indeed instigated by provocations, and it wasn't close to the nuclear facility or endangering the nuclear facility. IAEA was informed about this, and probably there was not such an incredible danger over there. But again, I would be able to judge about this only if I were on the ground, which I'm not. I think so far the crisis, the potential crisis is behind us. So the concern here about the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the only one is about that it was one of the biggest energy producers in Ukraine. So what are the repercussions of that? We will still have to see, but I don't think it's anything good. However, in terms of non-proliferation and damage, which might have been caused, from what I understand, there was no such a danger in the first place.
All right. Still with the same story, the incident at Europe's largest nuclear power plant located in southeastern Ukraine triggered global alarm and fear of catastrophe that could dwarf the world's worst nuclear disaster. The State Nuclear Regulatory Inspectorate of Ukraine said in a statement that losing cooling will lead to significant radioactive releases into the environment that could be worse than Chernobyl, while the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Mario Grossi, had called for a halt in fighting and warned of severe danger if any reactors were hit. And to talk more about this, I welcome here in our studios Hussam Berkan, PhD candidate of international political affairs. Well, Hussam, Russian troops seized Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant after an attack that sparked fires. What would we know, or what should we know about this nuclear power plant?
Thank you so much, Nadia, and thanks to our distinguished guests. So basically, Russia taking control over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. First of all, we need to talk about the nuclear capabilities and the nuclear power in Ukraine. You know that Ukraine is one of the biggest countries in Europe that relies heavily on the nuclear power. Basically, Ukraine has 5 nuclear power plants. 4 are active, and the 5th one is Chernobyl, which is not active because of the disaster that you've just mentioned, Nadia. And talking about Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is the largest in Europe, Nadia. This is a very important information that we should emphasize on. It's the largest in Europe, and it's among top 10 largest nuclear power plants in the world. And as I've already mentioned, Ukraine relies heavily on nuclear power. And this nuclear power plants, the capacity of this nuclear power plant is about 6,000 megawatt, which can basically which can power about 4 million houses in Ukraine. So, and there's also another information that we should emphasize on, which is that this nuclear power plant was built by the Soviet Union. And Russia taking control over it right now, maybe it's sending a message to Ukraine that I've taken control over 2 of the most important nuclear power plants in your country. The first one, Chernobyl, so symbolic, and the second one is the largest that was built by the Soviet Union. The question here that we should emphasize on also, Nadia, is that why Russia is doing this? This is the question that we should focus on, and the answer is there are actually 2 principal reasons. The first one is in any war or in any military operation, you should cut the supplies of energy over the other. And this is super important. Russia basically now is controlling this, the largest nuclear power plant. So Russia now is in control of the energy supplies. And the second one is for security reasons. Because, you know, Nadia, in any war, accidents happen. Oh. And if there was like any accident that happened, and yeah, it could cause a disaster. Any accident or any mistake would cause a disaster. And this is what world leaders were saying. They were accusing Russia and Putin of nuclear terror. And they're saying that you're putting a whole continent in danger. And
this probably is the whole world in this case.
Exactly. But like Europeans currently are so afraid of this because if anything happened, you know, the radiation cannot stop. We don't have the capacity to stop it now.
This actually reminds us of Chernobyl nuclear power plant. What is the importance of Chernobyl for Russia?
Exactly. This is similar to Chernobyl, and everybody is mentioning right now. You know, Nadia, that whenever we mention Chernobyl, a lot of people know about it because there were a lot of TV series, a lot of movies about it, and we all know about it. So where is exactly Chernobyl is the worst nuclear disaster in the history. Can you imagine this? There are only 2 nuclear disasters that caused a lot of damage. The first one is the Chernobyl, and the second one in 2011, the Fukushima nuclear plant exploded because of tsunami. And there is a scale that we use in order to measure the severity of the disaster. It's called the International Nuclear Event Scale. Chernobyl has given number 7, which is the maximum of severity. And this is why the world currently is so afraid of another accident, another disaster that would cause a lot of harm in terms of casualties. It is something that we're afraid of, and everybody is afraid of. The other thing is why it is important, Chernobyl, because Chernobyl is located in the north of Ukraine, just in the borders with Belarus, which is ally of Russia. And taking control of Chernobyl means that, because of the disaster, the area is empty. Nobody lives there. It means that the space and the area is empty. It means that the Russian troops can move freely. Nobody can intervene. And the other reason is that this place is empty, and also it's the nearest to the borders with Belarus. It means that this is the nearest way that the Russian troops can take in order to take control over the capital Kiev. It's the nearest path toward the capital Kiev.
Thank you so much, Hussam Berkan, PhD candidate of international political affairs, for bringing all of these insights. We cannot skip asking our guests here, how on earth such a country like Ukraine beholds on such a number of nuclear power plants? I put this question to both of you, Julia and Don. Julia or Don, please?
I guess I would allow Don to take it.
All right. Okay. Go ahead, Don. Go ahead.
All right. So in terms of this, we have to understand, of course, the history of Ukraine. We trace it back, of course, to the Soviet Empire in terms of the Soviet Union, in terms of its capacity to hold nuclear energy. And as we all know, since 1991. There have been discussions for Ukraine to let go of its nuclear arsenal, of course, in exchange for guarantees. And its capacity, of course, to withhold nuclear energy is still absolutely phenomenal. This is the reason why it is home to a lot of crucial infrastructure that could channel nuclear energy. So this also makes it very critical, of course, for European security and global security. And this, in fact, is something that we have to pay attention to as the situation continues to worsen. And hopefully, no such thing would happen. Currently, there are no reports of any radiation leaks. But as the situation continues, it will be necessary to, of course, keep in mind the safety of these very volatile infrastructures.
Thank you so much, Don. And let's now move all together to these pieces of information. G7 foreign ministers of Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK and US released a joint statement condemning the Russian military operation of Ukraine and urging Moscow to stop shelling Ukraine's nuclear power plant. Within the same context, an emergency summit of the UNSC was held after Zaporizhzhia power plant shelling. To U.S. President, the UN commented on the Russian action and described it as reckless and dangerous. Let's have a listen.
141 nations across the world have called loudly and clearly on President Putin to stop this brutal, unjustified, unprovoked attack. Not only has he not listened, we've just witnessed a dangerous new escalation that represents a dire threat to all of Europe and the world. As a first step, we call on Russia to withdraw its troops from the plant to permit medical treatment for injured personnel, to ensure operators have full access to the site and are able to communicate with nuclear regulators, and to allow the operators to conduct shift changes to ensure the continued safe operation of the plant.
Officials in Ukraine's strategic port city of Mariupol say they will start to evacuate civilians on Saturday after surrounding Russian forces announced a temporary ceasefire. Evacuations were due to begin at 11 a.m. local time, but the city council said Russian forces were not observing the agreed ceasefire along the whole length of the evacuation route and that negotiations were ongoing. After negotiations, Ukraine and Russia have agreed to create humanitarian corridors in areas of Ukraine where fighting is worst. Ukrainian presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolyak said while there was no breakthrough on a ceasefire, negotiators did reach agreement on joint efforts to secure humanitarian corridors for evacuations and the supply of medicine and food to sites. Let's have a listen.
Коммюнике, на которое вышли стороны, и, соответственно, мы договорились продолжить работу уже в третьем раунде в максимально ближайшие сроки. О совместном обеспечении гуманитарных коридоров для эвакуации мирного гражданского населения, а также для доставки медикаментов и продуктов питания в места наиболее ожесточенных боев с возможностью, подчеркиваю, с возможностью временного прекращения огня на период, когда будет осуществляться эвакуация в секторах, где она проводится.
Well, back to you, Don. Do you have any comments regarding this step so far from both sides, the Russian and the Ukrainians?
Right, thank you. Now, we have to understand that though the recent talks failed to highlight potential to stop the fighting, but we have to understand that this step actually to allow humanitarian corridors for civilians is a step towards the right direction. It is a positive outcome of the negotiations, and this also sort of promotes an individual-centric approach from both sides in recognition of the need to protect innocent lives. And of course, this will be a step further towards more rounds of negotiations. There would be the third round this weekend, and this would be an important step to sort of maintain the positive momentum. We have to understand that we should not expect a significant breakthrough overnight. In fact, because of the deeply rooted and historically rooted situation, we have to understand that progress may be slow, not as fast as we all might hope, but the progress that is happening is progress nonetheless, and we should continue creating a conducive atmosphere for both sides and all parties involved to maintain dialogue and negotiations, considering that every side has their own security concerns to talk about, and the only way to do that is to iron them out through proper negotiations and diplomatic channels, and not to aggravate the situation further. So despite it being a small step, this is a small step towards the right direction.
Hopefully. And always like related to what you have just said, international organizations indicate that about 1 million Ukrainians were forced to flee their country from the military operation that Russia launched on Ukraine about a week ago, which is entering its second week, amid expectations of a significant increase in the number of refugees. Let's follow this report by Hossein Berkan.
The United Nations announced the crossing of more than 1 million refugees from Ukraine towards neighboring countries following the Russian military intervention. According to data published by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, more than 1 million refugees crossed from Ukraine to neighboring countries between February 24 and March 2nd. More than half of them headed to Poland. The UNHCR indicated that more than 900,000 refugees crossed to Poland, Hungary, Moldova, and Slovakia. The organization also warned that the deteriorating situation in Ukraine could cause 4 million civilians to flee the country.
I'm from the Zhytomyr region. Missiles explode there. A rocket fell on the maternity ward. My relatives remained there. My husband defends our country.
The organization also indicated that 96,000 people crossed between February 18 and 23rd from Donetsk and Luhansk regions toward Russia.
We are from Kramatorsk, Donetsk region. We left because of the war. I'm scared to go to bed. I'm scared for my child's life. And we just packed up and we left. We traveled 1,007 kilometers to get here.
At the dawn of last February 24, Russia launched a military operation in Ukraine, which was followed by angry international reactions and the imposition of tough economic and financial sanctions on Moscow.
Well, back to you, Julia. These figures that we have just heard in this report are absolutely terrifying. Are there other factors behind this great exodus in such a short period of time?
Well, Nadia, indeed, the figures are terrifying, and the whole war, that not everybody would acknowledge it as such, but it is a war, is absolutely terrifying. And it's terrifying not only for people of Ukraine, but also for the people of Russia. Especially those who are still trying to comprehend how reasonable this military action against the Brotherhood nation was. Of course, the way that we are judging about the events, we're judging from and we're trying to give to provide our comments from the comfort of our homes, you from your studio, which I'm sure is safe enough. But people of Ukraine must be feeling a lot of fear. And even though the even if we rely on the fact that the Russian side is trying to abide by the Geneva Conventions, there are always casualties. There's always collateral damage, and we know that it's been acknowledged that civilians are dying. We are not sure how many, but casualties might be there, especially the more warfare moves to the urban areas. So, of course, people are fleeing either from the areas where the war is unfolding, or from the areas that might become a place where war is unfolding in the nearest future, out of fear for their lives, for the lives of their loved ones, and that's completely understandable. On the one hand, I think it might be cynical to say so, but we'll probably see a number of Ukrainian citizens who will move towards Europe and will stay there without an idea of returning back. And for some, it will be a good resettlement plan. But I wouldn't like to take this further, because the majority of those people, I think, are fleeing out of fear, not in search for better, especially in economic sense, life. I was glad that it also might be cynical on the other hand to say so, but I was glad to see how this refugee crisis exposed the double standards that we have in terms of which refugees some of the European countries are ready to take, and which they are not so much willing, even though there was a number of, for example, African nationals or Indian nationals working and living in Ukraine, trying to flee the war zones together with their Ukrainian families, wives and children, or husbands for that matter. And they were not so much welcome, especially in the case of Poland. So some people had to walk.
This absolutely, Julia, raises the question of discrimination here, and we have already discussed these points regarding the ethnicities or according to the nationalities of people. These people were being treated in the borders and as refugees. Still, stand families watch in disbelief as the huge fireball mushroomed into the cold air in Chernihiv. Russia made clear its plans, with Western security officials fearing they would overthrow the government and implement the new regime within days. NATO has rejected Ukraine's request for a no-fly zone, triggering outrage from President Volodymyr Zelensky, who claims the decision allows Russia to keep on its military operation in his nation. Nabil Khazini reports.
Arriving one after another, NATO foreign ministers met in Brussels to discuss a crisis reaching its 10th day in Ukraine.
We have to strengthen the eastern flank of NATO, speaking of NATO action.
10 days of fear as well inside NATO countries, whose leaders see the coming days to be even worse.
The days to come are likely to be worse, with more death, more suffering, and more destruction.
Kiev wanted NATO to be its shield against Russian missiles, a role rejected to be played by the North Atlantic Alliance, whose decision was met by strong criticism from the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
All NATO intelligence services are well aware of the enemy's plans. They also confirmed that Russia wants to continue the offensive. How is it possible? For 9 days, we have been witnessing a fierce war. They are destroying our cities. They are bombarding our people, our children, residential areas, churches, schools. They destroy everything that ensures a normal life, a human life, and they want to continue. Knowing that further strike and further casualties are inevitable, NATO has deliberately decided not to close the skies over Ukraine.
NATO has more than 200 ships and 130 fighter jets on alert, but the decision was firm. None will be used to create a no-fly zone.
We are not part of this conflict, and we have a responsibility to ensure it does not escalate and spread beyond Ukraine.
In the Baltic Sea, the United Kingdom led a coalition launching naval maneuvers in Copenhagen, a show intended to manifest Western unity against Russia.
The first time an international body rejects a call or a call from the president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky. What's your reading on this decision, Dan, please?
Right, thank you. Now, we understand that there are those in the West, particularly who support an idea of a no-fly zone. In fact, as you've rightfully mentioned, President Zelensky also is for this idea. However, we have to understand that this idea is indeed absolutely dangerous and could lead to an inevitable war between other major powers in Europe and has the potential to spill over beyond. And it's also problematic, especially because the US and NATO have actually emphasized that they will not send their troops in Ukraine to take part in the conflict. And this is absolutely crucial. And, you know, to be able to maintain such a no-fly zone, military power is needed for its maintenance. And we have to understand that the United States and Russia control at least 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. And this would be very catastrophic if this continues to escalate. And on top of that, more lives will be lost, more people would be displaced. I think the purpose of discussions and, of course, international efforts would not be to further worsen the situation at the expense of people, but to create an atmosphere that would be conducive for their stability in the long term. And I think doing something like this would be dangerous.
So you would say in this case that President Volodymyr Zelensky is actually dreaming big in this case, and probably he wanted the West to show such support. Dan?
It's not a matter of support in this way, but the casualties that would be that would result from, you know, this particular action. And I think if we do this, and let's say any equipment, a plane from Russia, a fighter plane from Russia gets shot down, and this could be seen as an act of war, and this could escalate further. And as I've mentioned, the results would be absolutely catastrophic. If we think what we're seeing now is already it's already dreadful, you know, imagine what could happen further. And I mean, this is not dealing with countries like Iraq or Libya in the past. This is dealing with another major power in Europe, and, you know, who has, as I've mentioned, a very lethal force as well. And with what is happening now in terms of the divisions, as we can see from the perceptions of states from different continents, this would also be very dangerous. So I think calculated steps must be taken for the people.
Okay. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said on Friday in Brussels that the United States and the European Union must maintain pressure on Russia to end the military operation in Ukraine. Let's have a listen.
Stability in Europe hangs in the balance. And the international rules-based order that's critical to maintaining peace and security is being put to the test by Russia's unprovoked and unjustified invasion of Ukraine. Russia's attack created this humanitarian crisis. Now, all countries have a responsibility to pressure the Kremlin to alleviate at least some of the misery that it has wrought. I said that if Russia chose the path of aggression, we would impose massive consequences on Russia, including unprecedented economic sanctions. I know some people thought that was more rhetoric than reality. I think we've demonstrated already how strong that reality is. And again, we're looking every day at measures to increase the extraordinary pressure we're already exerting.
Faced with the escalation of the conflict in Ukraine, US and Russian military have established between them a new telephone channel supposed to be used in case of emergency, announces the Pentagon.
We don't have perfect knowledge of exactly how this attack on the nuclear power plant transpired. Clearly there was one. Clearly it was violent. Clearly ordnance was used. An attack was conducted on the power plant in an effort by Russian forces to gain control of it. We cannot contest or refute reports that they are in fact in control of it.
President Vladimir Putin said in a telephone conversation with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz Friday that Moscow was open to dialogue with Ukraine and hoped that Kiev would take a reasonable stance during a third round of talks between Russia and Ukraine. However, Scholz expressed worry over the reports of civilian casualties and military losses on both sides. And here, let's have a closer look to the list of Ukrainian and Russian demands as follows. As President Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin of Russia return for peace talks, Ukraine has listed demands that include an immediate Russian ceasefire, troops withdrawal from and immediate European Union membership for Ukraine. On the other hand, Russia is still sticking to its previous list of demands and security guarantees, which include the West to agree to lower tensions in Europe and defuse the crisis over Ukraine. NATO should limit its deployment of troops and weapons to the alliance's eastern flank, in effect returning the Allied forces to where they were stationed in 1997 before an eastward expansion. Moscow demands a guarantee from Ukraine that it will not enter the US-led NATO, and NATO ruled out further expansion, including the accession of Ukraine into the alliance, and that it does not hold drills without previous agreement from Russia in Ukraine, Eastern Europe, in Caucasus, countries such as Georgia or Central Asia. And finally, Moscow also calls for the two countries, US and Russia, to pull back any short or medium-range missile systems out of reach, replacing the previous immediate-range nuclear forces treaty that the US left in 2018. After this, reading both lists and demands from the sides of Russia and Ukraine, Julia, are these demands of both sides logical and able to be respected in this case?
Well, Nadia, I think demands by both sides, they, especially on the part of Russia, which I prefer to comment on, they reflect the concerns that existed before, prior to the start of this military operation that spilled over into war. And since the first and foremost concern behind this military operation was declared as such, as a concern about NATO expansion eastwards, especially on the territory of Ukraine, possibility of even NATO nuclear forces based in there. The demand is reasonable, even though it cannot be demanded, as we understand, from Ukraine itself. Ukraine does not belong to NATO; it's not a member of NATO, so there should be NATO commanders who would potentially guarantee non-expansion. Prior to the start of military campaign, they were not so keen to shut the door to the membership of others, and probably that also was an input of Vladimir Putin's resolve for the start of this attack. However, unfortunately, the practical experience of negotiations along with the war actions, especially on the territories of former Soviet republics, which we can recall several episodes within 2000s, since the start of the 2000s. The negotiations do not mean that the ceasefire would be implemented tomorrow if the agreement is reached today. There were several rounds of negotiations on those conflicts, and it seems that within the Ukrainian campaign, that would be the same case. Sometimes agreements or decisions on the ceasefire even led to further escalation. That also might be expected. And I think practical experience is very much informative in this. So unfortunately, I would foresee that negotiations going hand in hand with the military action. My only hope is that at some point it will have to stop, the parties will have to reach to the conclusion, because I think on both sides, well, on Ukraine, it's overall it's a great tragedy of what is happening on the territory of that sovereign country. For Russia, the declared agenda of denazification, demilitarization of Ukraine, I think those priorities might undergo some changes, because it must be clear by this point that people of Ukraine would not be looking at the Russian troops as liberators of them against their own regime of Vladimir Zelensky and his colleagues. So it won't be possible, even in the case of full undeniable victory of the Russian forces over Ukraine. I don't see it feasible for Russia to control the territory of Ukraine or installing a puppet regime, as
all right.
This might be seen in the other stream of propaganda. I don't see it viable for a long-term perspective. So they would have to reach to some conclusion,
all right.
to some security guarantees.
This is according to you, Julia. And before I get back to you, Don, let's follow this. The US and its allies have retaliated against Russia's special military operation in Ukraine with some unprecedented sanctions in the last week. Rather, from intervening militarily, they have retaliated by attacking Russia's economy. The details in this report by Karim Fazakri.
Over the course of the week, the sanctions have become more severe. What started out as supposedly limited package of measures aimed at isolating the two breakaway Ukrainian regions of Donetsk and Luhansk on February 21st has quickly developed into the most extensive set of multilateral economic sanctions ever imposed on a major global economy. By taking such drastic measures so fast, the Biden administration and its foreign allies sought to inflict costs on Russia that would push it to reassess its military operation in Ukraine before it became too lengthy. Even as the extent and severity of the punishments have increased, these efforts have so far been fruitless. Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, has showed no evidence of changing his mind. The hope from the US and its allies appears to be that his calculus, or that of the people around him, might alter as the implications for the Russian people become more severe. Putin's move hit Russia's economy, crippling the ruble. However, several companies took action and decided to pull out from Russia. Many big tech companies expressed support of Ukraine, abandoning projects happening in Russia or stopped selling their articles.
BP said they would pull out of oil and gas investment in Russia worth billions. ExxonMobil abandoned the $4 billion oil and gas project. Meanwhile, Shell ditched its stakes and left major gas project in Siberia and the Gidan Peninsula.
Apple announced that it was stopping all sales of iPhones, MacBooks, and other Apple products to Russia, limited access to Apple Pay, and banned Russian propaganda apps.
Volkswagen stopped its operations and production in Russia. General Motors, Ford, BMW, Volvo, and Mercedes-Benz stopped selling cars.
Big planes manufacturer companies such as Boeing and Airbus suspended their building projects and the supply of parts and maintenance for their planes on the Russian territory.
IKEA stopped its operations in Russia and Belarus. Fashion giant H&M closed its stores and stopped new orders during the week. ASOS and Boo made similar moves. Nike and IKEA closed stores.
UPS, DHL, and FedEx stopped their delivery service to Russia and Ukraine amid the military operation. Sea mail delivery companies such as Maersk and MSC, Mediterranean shipping companies, stopped cargo shipments to Russia.
Disney and Warner Media paused the release of new movies.
And Norway's $1.3 trillion sovereign wealth fund said it would divest shares of 47 Russian companies and Russian government bonds, and the list goes on.
Well, we are running out of time. Very special thanks to Julia Roknifad and Don McLean for joining us. We are going to discuss what has left in the upcoming editions. Thank you so much for following us on Alt24 News. Bye-bye.